Welcome, fellow splitting geniuses, to another electrifying episode of Splitting Smart, where we're back with exclusive insights and expert advice on all things divorce and well-being. And I'm your host, Lila Aiken Ali, and I'm joined with my co-founder and co-host, Heather Steer. And at Splitting Smart, we really believe that knowledge is power. We're committed to empowering you with the information and the tools you need to make smart, informative decisions as you navigate the world of divorce and well-being. Today, we're excited to share Erin's invaluable insights and knowledge on how divorce coaching can help you through the divorce process. With her years of experience in family law and coaching, Erin has helped countless clients navigate the complexities of divorce and emerge stronger and more empowered than ever before.
Thank you.
So Erin is the founder of Erin Schaden Coaching and Mediation, and it's an innovative coaching and conflict resolution firm specializing in helping clients navigate the challenges of divorce and separation. And again, the years of experience, 27. Wow, Erin, I don't know how you've survived in this industry for that long.
Yeah,
Crazy.
It is. And she is an attorney licensed to practice in Maryland, New Mexico, and the District of Columbia. So clearly she has an expertise in family law and so much wealth to share. I think one of the things that really sets Erin apart is her unique ability to help clients navigate the emotional and the practical challenges of divorce with compassion, clarity, and empathy. So as her career has progressed, she's shifted her focus from practicing law to coaching and conflict resolution. And again, I think that makes her really uniquely equipped to help clients emerge stronger and smarter from their divorce journey. So whether you're in the midst of a divorce, considering one, or simply looking to stay informed, this episode is for you. I think one of the best in the business as we explore the ways that divorce coaching can help you. And welcome, Erin. And a little bit of background. Erin and I had a few years ago had a case together, probably now 4 or 5 years ago. So that's where we got to know each other. And then we all took our certified divorce coaching credential together. So it's such a pleasure looping back with you now and seeing the work that you're doing continues and aligning it with what we're up to.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, we were actually talking beforehand, before recording, about how you've really, your unique experience in every hot seat besides financials.
Yes. Yes.
So I know we gave an intro, but maybe a little bit of how you really have this unique perspective on every angle of everything of divorce, including your own. So that.
Well, I think every divorce is unique. I mean, I get people all the time. They're like, no, my girlfriend whose husband does the exact same job as mine, and we have the exact same number of kids, and she got XYZ, or, and I'm like, no divorce is the same, right?
Nope.
Every divorce is different. And so I think that that's where, like, the 27 years, almost 28, in May it'll be 28 years of experience come in, is that I've seen, I would never be so arrogant as to say I've seen it all, but I've seen a lot, right? So no two divorces are the same, even if everything else is equal, right? It's that they're doing the same job, they have the same number of kids, they live in the same neighborhood, the same house, like all that stuff. It's still, we're dealing with individuals, right? So everything is unique and different each time. But I think I've been around the block enough times, and I've sat at, the mediation seat or the litigator seat, or getting the divorce myself, or the coaching seat, that I can kind of see it from a whole bunch of different perspectives. And like oftentimes, like this morning, this therapist who I've worked with a little bit, she had a call with her attorney, and she wanted to talk to me herself this morning because she just wanted bounce back. Like, what should I be asking my attorney today? Is it fair for me to expect that of my attorney? What do you think my attorney would say? And then of course they always want me to give legal advice, which I don't do, but it just that kind of, it's kind of a more well-rounded perspective on all of the different, because I've sat in all the different seats except for financial, because I have no expertise in that whatsoever.
Well, that's actually, but that, to the point, is really part of this is, how do you manage not just your relationship and communication with your ex, but during all of this, but it's with your professionals and with your legal counsel, which is huge, right? Because a lot of times people mismanage that, that relationship is so important keep in a way that is like there's great communication, it's very clear. What are you asking them? And it's not about what it's not just what to ask them, but what to expect is actually a really great thing to get knowledge from you about, right? Like what would you expect a lawyer to respond? How to,
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times I used to be kind of embedded as a divorce coach in a high-end family law firm. And so I would hear the clients, they would call me and complain about their lawyer. And then I would hear the lawyers complaining about the client. It was, first of all, there's a huge difference with how men and women communicate differently. And so I would sometimes give that little speech about kind of, men want information and women want to communicate to build relationships. And so if you consider who you're speaking to, you can get a lot more bang for your buck. For the female clients that we're talking to, the male attorneys, I'd say, they don't want to hear how your weekend was. They want you to get to the point, right? Whereas if you're talking to, and this is, very stereotypical and not absolute, I don't mean to alienate anybody by saying that, but just generally speaking, and it really helps. And then, women would get very offended when the male attorney would call them up and say, I need this right now. And they want to build a relationship. And so I was able to kind of steer them in the direction. Like I tell the attorneys, like, hey, listen, you need to give the client some love. You need to let them tell you about their weekend, right? Because they don't trust you otherwise. Like you can't just be an information repository. You have to be somebody that they feel like they can trust. And then with the clients, I'd be like, okay, listen, your attorney's billing you, you're paying for this time. Do you really want to spend 40 minutes talking about your weekend or whatever happened? Be succinct, be direct, and you're going to get more buy-in from your attorney. And so then they communicated more effectively where both sides felt heard and understood, as opposed to kind of what was happening, which was like they just were kind of bouncing and colliding off of each other, which happened a lot, and it wasn't helpful for anybody at that regard. Everybody's frustrated and nobody feels heard, which is, I think what is one of the biggest perils in the whole divorce, aspect is that, everybody's got something that they need to say and they don't feel like anybody's really listening to them.
And oftentimes that we hear this often in the community is that my lawyer doesn't like me or they're not on my side,
and that's criminal. It's criminal that you're paying somebody that much money to feel like they're not even working for you. I mean, that's a huge disconnect. And when I was with the firm, I would say to them, listen, if you feel like that, because you will feel like that, everybody does at some point in time in their divorce. So call me up. Let's fix that before it becomes a huge problem, because you do not, hopefully if everybody's done their job well, you never see the inside of a courtroom, right? Like that's the goal, right? For every divorce, never see the inside of a courtroom, never have to file anything but the standard pleadings to get you divorced. That's the goal. But if the litigation machine does what it does, especially when you've got high conflict personalities involved and you end up in a trial, usually by the time the client ends up in a trial with their attorney, the attorney can't stand the client and the client can't stand the attorney, which is exactly the absolute worst time for that relationship to completely fall apart, right? So like we got to deal with it on an ongoing basis, and oftentimes clients will call me and say stuff and my attorney and I'll say, well, I don't know why your attorney did what they did or said what they said, but here's a different perspective. Like if I was operating as an attorney in your case, I might have said that or done that because of this. You should ask your attorney why they did this, right? It's not confrontational. You have a right to know, just ask. You're trying to improve the communication. And here's a nice way to ask that. Here's how you could phrase that. And then, if they actually follow that advice and do it, the relationship is repaired and they go, oh, I understand. The attorney was thinking this, and now it makes sense why they did what they did.
Yeah. And it's, and you are in a fight for your life. So a lot of times the clients are operating from a space of, the amygdala brain, they're like fight or flight, and they're, having a hard time communicating, what their particular needs are at the time. So, it's very challenging, and an attorney is showing up every day, getting people divorced every day. Right. And this is the first time and hopefully the only time, that someone is getting divorced. So the stakes are so much higher for that person versus like the attorney working on a file. And a lot of times attorneys coming in and going, I just need to like work this file today and push something forward. And it's, they can't, and honestly, I think there's a little bit on any side to protect themselves from a lot of these stories too.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
and that's,
Attorneys are always looking to cover their rear ends. Absolutely. Because, clients, people that are in crisis make bad decisions. And oftentimes people are looking for somebody to blame. And at the end of the case, the attorney is a great person to blame for not getting, what they, and Heather, what I heard, what I call it is emotional facts, right? Clients come to you with emotional facts, right? And if attorneys don't do a good job of marrying those emotional or doing something with those emotional facts, they create the legal reality. And that doesn't match what the legal facts are, right? And so you've got this huge disconnect because the attorneys are dealing with like legal facts. I can't tell you how many times people are like, well, I know he's having an affair. Well, how do you know that? Because he wasn't home, his car wasn't in the driveway at 11 p.m. last night when I drove by. Well, first of all, you shouldn't be driving by his house at 11 p.m. because that's kind of stalking. So don't do that, number one. And number two, like, there's like 27,000 other reasonable explanations as to why his car wasn't in the driveway. Maybe it was in the garage. Maybe it's in the shop. Maybe he's away on a business trip. There's a million different reasons, but for the client, that is an emotional fact. He is cheating because his car wasn't in the driveway, right? Like, that is not absolutely the truth. And the attorney is going to ask them those questions like, how do you know? How did you find out? How did you verify this information? And clients, what I see happen is they just get completely overwhelmed when they have to take what is really an emotional fact, right? They feel hurt. They feel like their spouse is cheating on them or whatever. And then they're being asked to kind of lay that emotional fact over this legal framework when it all falls apart, right? And the attorneys I don't think always do a good job of saying, okay, if we want to prove, if you really believe that this emotional fact is actually true, then here's what we need to do to prove it, right? And they need to explain why there's this transition between this emotional reality for the client and this legal reality, which exists over here, right? And that's what I think a divorce coach is supposed to do. Like, my job is to take people's divorce that's happening in this zip code, right? And the legal reality is occurring somewhere in, 93023, right? And their emotional realities in Zimbabwe, right? And my job is to help the attorney bring it into the zip code, right? Like, maybe it's, not, it's in Ventura and I need to get it into Ojai or whatever, but you need to get it somewhere in the sense, because if not, at the end of when all is said and done, whether the attorney did an amazing job or didn't do that great of a job, whatever happened, the client doesn't understand what happened. The client doesn't know what happened. They don't know what they were supposed to expect. And they have all of these emotional facts that were actually not factually accurate, that have never been checked. And so they get divorced with this same kind of emotional fact pattern that they have, and it never matched with the legal. And nobody ever addressed that incongruence. And the client feels completely like they were just bludgeoned during the process. And if the attorney had the skills to do that, or the time, because then clients are always, kind of upset about the billable hours, and, clients call and they want it over with really quickly because they know they're being billed. But then that creates this disparate dynamic that's existing, where the emotional facts continue for the client and the attorney doesn't want to address them because they don't want to spend more time on the client's case. And then they're just not even in the same zip code at the end of it.
No. And then you feel like you've lost. And we talk about this, and there's no winning in any of it, but you constantly feel like you've lost, your way for all. And that's where, again, the divorce coaching really helps, because it's that person, that thinking partner, the trusted person that can really help you and guide you, and also allow for that space and time to understand what the truth really is. Because again,
and how to prove it in a court of law, right? Because
exactly,
there's all kinds of things that we walk around in everyday life saying, okay, well, this happened, right? But when you, and that's fine in everyday life, but when you're taking it into a courtroom, right, where the rules of evidence apply, right, the rules of civil procedure apply, all of these things, you can't just walk in and take the stand and go, yeah, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and here it is. Because then you're going to have somebody on the other side going, wait a minute, that's hearsay. Wait a minute, you can't say that. Wait a minute. And the clients don't understand that, because why would they, right? They don't have a legal education. They don't understand. And hopefully, this is their first interaction with the legal system, right? So it is like landing on Mars, right? And trying to figure out like, okay, how do I get water? How do I do anything, right? Like, they don't have any idea. And then there's all of these terms that are very scary that they don't understand. And attorneys, kind of, because they're in the trenches every day, just doing the deal, they forget, I remember when I went with a girlfriend, she had an uncontested divorce in the state of Virginia, and you had one hearing, right? And basically you had to bring a witness that had said, that could testify, that was like, yes, I've been to their house. Yes, they're not living together anymore. Yes, all of his stuff is gone, blah, blah, blah. It was like no big deal, right? It was like an appearance and a rubber stamp, right? Like it was like this tiny little, sorry about that, tiny little thing. And she was devastated. Like I was like, I looked at her and she was like all upset. And I was like, what is going on? And she's like, I'm terrified. And I said, why? She goes, because I'm going before a judge. And I was like, yeah, he's going to ask you some questions. He's going to ask me some questions. He's going to sign your divorce and it's going to be done. And then we're going away for the weekend. Yay. And but it changed everything for me, that experience, because I realized every time I walked into court with a client, I was just going to do my job, right? I was just walking in and I was going to do my deal. But my client is having this completely different reality because they don't understand. Like they see TV, they think that the judge has the power to throw them in jail if something doesn't work out right? They don't know. And so that was so helpful early on in my career for me to be like, okay, I need to spend time on the front end explaining what's going to happen, how it's going to go down, what the possible consequences are, what the possible consequences are not, how that's going to be, so the client feels comfortable in the process. And I think that that's important, whether you're in a courtroom or just going through the process, right? The client needs to understand what that looks like.
Yeah, and
I do think that lawyers tend to lose sight of that, because again, they are doing this day in and day out, and they do try to be very efficient with your time, at least, the good ones out there that aren't trying to churn a file and run a book. But the good ones are trying to sort of do that. And I would tell this audience, like, make sure that if you aren't comfortable or something isn't going, like, bring it up. Actually ask your attorney, hey, what does that actually look like? Because your example of going into court, going into mediation, going into, whatever is so real for these clients. They don't know what those rooms look like. They don't know, what their options are. And it's, once you explain it to them, they're like, oh, okay, that doesn't sound so crazy. And that seems reasonable. And, so I think that's, really, really important to advocate for yourself if you're not comfortable. And then, using your divorce coach to start explaining some of that too is huge.
Well, and the fear is for real. And that's the whole point, is that, half the time as a divorce coach, I'm usually talking somebody off the ledge because they are gone into catastrophe mode.
Yes.
And they've already gotten themselves in court in front of a judge and losing everything. Literally.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't even have to be that way. But when you're already there, how do you function and make good decisions in the real time? So it's like taking it and dialing it back and being like, let's be present.
Right.
This is actually what we're working with, right? So,
occupying the same space at the same time. People get so far out there. And, it's like, you got to keep them tethered to like the here and now, what's actually going on, what is actually happening. I tell people all the time, like, when you go through a divorce, you are orbiting around two poles, the hope one or the fear, right? And clients drag themselves back and forth, and then they spin around the axes, and when they're hopeful, right, they don't listen to anything anybody's going to say, because they're like, it's all going to be fine. I don't need a divorce coach. I don't need my attorney. It's all going to be fine. We're going to work everything out. It's going to be great, right? And then the other side does something, right? There's like some pivotal moment, right? Something like rocks the world, right? And then they're over to the fear pole, and then they're circling that, and they're like, oh my God, I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to be living in a van down by the river. Oh my God, everything's, and it's like, and that I think is our job, is to like help them go, okay, let's stop orbiting the two poles. Let's come to the center and figure out what you need to do about the things that you're afraid of, right? Reality is that probably you're not going to work out everything all at once sitting down together. Like, that's probably not realistic. But what could we tackle? What is the most important thing, and start with, I love pro-con lists. I think that they're an amazing tool. But I also like just prioritizing, if you've got 20 issues, that is overwhelming. Nobody can deal with 20 issues at one time. So what are you most afraid of, or what are you most hopeful about? Like, where, and that is always a great place to begin. Like, okay, if you think that you're going to be able to negotiate custody, let's talk about that first. Let's figure out how to approach your ex about that. How to talk about that. What do you think a plausible custody agreement would be? Or if that's the thing you fear the most and that's causing you to not sleep at night, let's start there, and you can use their hope and fear to help them rather than to just let them spin around these axes that get them absolutely nowhere. And then they're just a mess, you know? And and divorce just doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. If you have somebody to help you, guide you, and offer up experience and alternative solutions, it really doesn't have to be that. I mean, I use my own divorce as an example of that because I was a divorce attorney for all these years. I knew exactly what to do and exactly what not to do, right? And I followed my own advice. And, we went out to lunch, we sat down and we wrote out our divorce agreement on the back of a napkin, right? And I realized how lucky I am. I also had a cooperative person on the other side, right? So that was, but I think that can happen so much more often than it actually does. But people have these buttons, and it gets triggered, and then the whole thing blows up, and then the attorneys are trying, while protecting the client. And I think that people don't understand that. Like, an attorney's job is to think about the worst case scenario and to protect you from that, right? And oftentimes that gets in the way of making an agreement. Because making the agreement could open you up to great exposure, and the exposure might be greater in the attorney's mind than what you could gain in the agreement, right? But nobody ever talks about that, really. They don't sit down and talk about that, kind of your return on investment, or your return on, making this agreement. They instead try to, and so clients feel like they're being pushed into the litigation. And really what the attorney is trying to do is mitigate damages that they see coming down the line, because they've done this 27,000 times, right? Not because, but there's this lack of communication that goes on. And so clients don't completely understand why they're being led this way. And the attorneys oftentimes don't do a very good job of explaining that, to the client. So the client understands, like, okay, yeah, we can try to get this agreement, but here's what you're giving up in the process, right? And here's what you're exposing yourself to by playing these cards right now. Like, maybe we want to hold on to those a little bit longer. And I think oftentimes too, attorneys kind of arrogantly believe that they know what's best because they've done this a million times. And it's like, yeah, that may be best for the last 27 people you represented, but for this particular person, it's not best. And the best client that you can have is a client who is working with you, not against you, and is empowered to make those choices for themselves after, I always tell people, like, okay, the attorney's job is to take issue A and say pros and cons, here you go. My years of experience say that you should pick option B, right? That's what I think is best. And then the client then has all the information and can say, I really understand that you think I should pick B. I don't like B. B scares me. I'd really rather, could we try C first? Could we go to C first? And then can I still do B? And then the attorney can explain why or why not that's possible. And then everybody is operating from the same sheet of music, but that just doesn't happen. The attorney calls them up and says, hey, we need to do, they filed an ex parte. Here's what has to happen. And the client doesn't understand that there's many other options that could happen. The attorney could pick up the phone and call the other side and say, hey, do we really need to have an ex parte? The attorney could write them an email. There's lots of other things that could happen, and there's reasons to do those things and not, Yeah.
It's, statistically, there aren't a lot of people that after their divorce is settled, go after the settlement agreement again. You're so exhausted, you're so burnt out, you're so financially done. So it is important to kind of get things as materially right as possible, because your energy level to ever go against your agreement tends to be very low. But people who, and with the exception of being someone who was in a massive court thing, but again, statistically, very small people go to trial. Very few people then want to go kick that can or open that back up if they went that far with.
Yeah.
So,
litigation fatigue is a real thing. And people always think that that's just about trial and going into court. Litigation is the process by which you get divorced, right? Whether you end up with a settlement and never see the inside of the courtroom, you've engaged in litigation, because the second somebody files with this, the state and says, I want you to dissolve my marriage, you are in litigation. And it can be litigation, or it can be litigation, right? And there's a fatigue that happens no matter what it is, right? When you're having to deal with these outsiders in your personal business, day after day, in your finances, your sex life, all of these intimate personal things that maybe you don't even tell your best friend all of this stuff, right? Now you've got these people that are virtual strangers that you're handing money to, that you're involved with on a daily basis. That is exhausting, just that alone, in addition to having to deal with all of the other people. Maybe you've got a custody evaluator, you've got a mediator, you've got maybe a private I mean, there's all kinds of different players that enter in your life and become a part of your everyday. And that is exhausting because any relationship requires work, right? And whether you're doing a bang up job of it or not doing that great a job, it's still a relationship that requires care and maintenance. And the more people you're maintaining a relationship with, the more exhausting it is, and then just, getting divorced, there's all these benchmarks, right? That you have to hit. The court says you have to do financial disclosures. The court says you have to do this, you have to do that. And then there's the whole discovery thing that throws everybody off because nobody understands what that is, right? And oftentimes the attorneys don't learn their case until they do discovery, right? They don't really understand what is going on in this case. And it's really expensive and incredibly time consuming, and should be avoided if at all possible. But that's only when you've got two people that are willing to fair deal, right? Like, here's all my stuff, here's all your stuff, here you go, give it to the attorneys, let them run with it. Oftentimes you got somebody who's hiding the ball, and then you have to engage in that process, and nobody really understands why. And it's so difficult.
It is. And on top of it, the layer of how many decisions you need to make. And I think there is that fatigue also, decision-making fatigue.
Absolutely.
So how many times do we have clients in our community will just like, I don't want to decide anymore. I'm going to let the lawyer do it, or I'm going to let this person do it. Like, they're completely giving up on their decision-making power because of this exact same thing. Everything that you just said, it's like by the time they have to make a decision, forget about it.
Yeah, I liken it to people that decide that they want to build their own home from scratch. There are so many decisions. Do you want this color paint? Well, what kind of sheen do you want the paint to have? Do you want all of the walls painted? Do you want the ceiling painted? It's like ridiculous, the number of, and that's just paint, like countertops, knobs, cabinets, all that stuff. And you think it's going to be this really fun process, right? Like, oh, I get to pick out everything myself. But every person I've ever known that's built a home or remodeled a home, and you get in that place, and at the end of it, you're like, they're looking at the contractors going, I don't care, pick the flooring. I can't make another decision. I'm going to lose my mind. I don't care what my floor looks like anymore. You pick the paint, you pick the fixtures. I don't even care. I'm so done with this whole process. And that's exactly what happens in divorce. Exactly. You get to the point where you're like, I just can't make one more decision. And usually people get, kind of stalled out in an eddy. Usually in the beginning of the case, it's either a custody fight in the beginning, because that's the thing that's driving the divorce, or it's a financial thing. And they have to make all of these different decisions about that. So then, they get a decision, or they get a court order, they get an agreement about this, first issue, finances, support, whatever, custody. And then the attorney's like, okay, now we can get going on the rest of the case. And the person just looks at you like, oh my God, no, let it end. Please let it end. Please let this be over. What do I need to do? And oftentimes, especially in a high conflict situation, there really isn't anything. You just have to endure, right? The only way out is through, and you just have to continue to do that. And that's where I think it becomes really important for somebody like us to step in and be like, okay, now you need to think about self-care. Now you need to think about all of these things, because otherwise you're not going to be able to endure what's coming. Right? Because we know what's coming, right? We know it's going to get uglier. That was ugly, but this is about to get uglier, and it was funny. We had a client who was engaged. I mean, when I left, his case was 3 years in, and they'd spent over $1 million in attorney's fees and forensic accountant fees, and they still weren't done. And we'd had a 13-day trial about a domestic violence issue. We still weren't done. And on that very first meeting, I knew what kind of case this guy was going to have just by the way it came. It blew in the door. And I tried to tell him, right? And he was like, I don't know, maybe it was 3 months later, he looked at me and he goes, you tried to tell me and I couldn't hear you. And I was like, I totally get why you couldn't hear me. Who would have wanted the reality that I was presenting to you, right? Nobody. Nobody wants that reality. And I would have done everything I could to be like, nope, it's not going to go like that. I'm just going to give her half. It's going to be fine. We're going to split the kids. It's all going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Right. It's going to be fine. And then 3 months into it, he's like, oh my God, this is the worst nightmare. And it's still going on to my knowledge. And it's just, how do you prepare somebody for that? Right. And I think that's where we as coaches kind of come in to shore the people up, to be able to say to them, look, you have to take care of yourself. Whatever that looks like, right? You have to be able to set the litigation aside. You have to communicate with your attorney. I'm going away for a week. I cannot be contacted for any reason about this litigation. I'm turning off my litigation thing. Is that possible? When can I do it? It needs to happen, because otherwise, you're involved in years long, that kind of litigation. People lose it. I mean, they really do. And
they do.
stable, sane people do crazy, insane, horrible things to themselves and others when they're pushed to the mat like that with no relief in sight, financial.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about this in our group. It's like we have a Friday, morning coffee chat, and on Friday, it's like how many of them come and like, oh, got a letter from the lawyer on the other side. I was like, it's the classic that you're getting the letter from the lawyer on a Friday to ruin your weekend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
it's a strategy.
so, and it's a total strategy. I told my lawyer, in fact, I was like, I don't want anything on a Friday. Send it to me on a Monday. I'm not going to look at it. You're not going to look at it. You're not going to look at my response. I don't want my weekends to be, destroyed, and I will, check it out on Monday.
Well, and hopefully, like at the firm that I worked at, we had a practice where if it was just regular correspondence, it just got put through the paces and sent to the client. But if it was something inflammatory, it was flagged and it was sent to the attorney and said, like, the client is going to need an explanation about this. When do you want to send it? And sometimes clients would get mad that the attorney sat on it. But, the client would call me and complain, and I'd be like, okay, so the attorney had two choices. The attorney could lob the grenade and then be unavailable to you and watch you spin out crazily, right? And maybe come up with solutions that are not really solutions, that are just going to make the situation worse. Or the attorney had the choice to sit on it for a few hours until they could free up, and then be able to deliver the grenade to you and say, okay, read this and then call me, and I'm available to talk to you about it, but a lot of times attorneys don't do that. They just let the grenades fly, and then the attorneys are baffled as to why their clients are completely losing their minds. Well, attorney, you sent them this hugely inflammatory correspondence at 4:57 on a Friday, right?
Yeah.
So by the time you get to the client on Monday, unless you're working on the weekends, which most divorce attorneys do not want to do, the client has just, devastated. And I had a client that was just completely devastated the entire weekend. Like, she honestly contemplated suicide over something that was nothing. Like, the letter looked really bad, but when the attorney put some parameters around it, it was a nothing burger. It was nothing. Right. But she was near suicidality over the weekend because of this letter. And I was like, okay, so we have to not send those. Like, hold that till Monday. Right. Because a lot of people don't know to say that. You can say to your attorney, I don't want any correspondence. Don't call me after 5. Don't call me, whatever, like to create those
100%.
boundaries so that the litigation, so that you're living also, right? You're not just litigating, right? Because you can't stop living. And a lot of people end up doing that, and then they get to the end of it and they're just bludgeoned, right? And how do you begin a new life when you're like 6 feet, almost 6 feet under? Like, how do you do that? It's so hard.
The goal of divorce, coaching, is to really help you come out as physically and emotionally whole as possible, right?
And financially too. All of the things.
Yeah, then throw in the financial part of it too. It's to help you make smart decisions. And another, tip besides the pros and cons list that you mentioned earlier is, set up an email that your divorce communication is coming through, so that you only engage with that at the right time for yourself. And then, to Erin's point, communicate with your attorney like, hey, I don't want any communication late in the afternoon on a Friday, or after this, or when you send me a communication, then let me know via text and I will go look at this other email box so that I can go check it out. All of these attorneys out there have these modalities also to use with you. So set those boundaries, because you will end up exhausted if all you're doing is waiting for like that ding in your email box or the phone call or the, in the next step in your process. And you need to start figuring out how to live during this process as well, because you will, wither away on the vine otherwise.
Yeah, you're never getting this time back, right? Like, the time is spent and it's done and it's over. And, I think that that's the biggest thing that I see clients get lost in, is that they just get churned in this litigation machine, whether it is kind of a routine litigation or whether it's a crazy litigation. The same thing happens. You just get lost in the process, and you get to the end of it and you have like these assets and you have these liabilities and you have this custody, and you don't see how any of it fit together. It feels very unfair, right? It doesn't feel like you got what you wanted. Nobody looked at you and said that your ex was a horrible person, right? Like, that had any kind of authority, even though you've got 72 pages of why they're such a horrible person, right? And how you were done so wrong. And you end up in this place where it's just like, I call it the puddle or the pill, right? Like the puddle is the person that goes through this entire process. Oh, I'm so sorry. My dogs are barking like crazy.
Okay.
So, you know, the puddle goes through this whole process and they get to the end of it and they have this money and they have the stuff and they can't launch anything. They're just a mess. They're a puddle, right? They're just a puddle. And the pill is the same person, except at the end of it, they're just angry. They're just mad. They don't understand. They feel like they were wronged. You know, they felt like they were wronged in their relationship, and then the divorce process wronged them even more. And then, and that's how they launch into their new lives. They're either a complete disaster or they're really, really angry, right? Which is like, who wants to launch a new life like that? And what kind of new life would you be launching if you're coming from that place? Like if you're a puddle, you have no energy to do that. And if you're really, really angry, you have this whole other thing. I'm so sorry about the dogs.
It's okay. I barely can hear the dogs. And
Okay,
we're
good.
Very
Well,
dog friendly.
I can hear them.
This is our this is
Real
our
life.
Zoom world.
Diving into my professional life here. Yes, yours are very well behaved. Mine are not. I think there's somebody at the door.
Where am I? One's passed out.
Yeah, the goal is to not have a client. And I think that that's like one of the biggest things that a divorce coach can do is prevent you from being the puddle or the pill. Like, you know what's happening to you, you know why it's happening. You know, if you're being wronged, there are steps that you can take to be able to do that, to avoid kind of not feeling like you're just a cog in everybody else's machine. And then, you know, so that when you're done, like it is all said and done, that you're like ready. Right? You're ready to launch this new life. You're ready. You know, you've gotten the therapy, you've made the decisions, you understand the process, and you know why you got what you got and why you didn't get what you didn't get. Right? I say the best divorce settlement is where both people are unhappy. Right? Like both people should be like, you know what? It's not what I wanted, but I can live with it. Right? Like that is a great divorce settlement, right? Where you're not completely happy, because nobody gets everything that they want. Very rarely does anybody get everything that they want. And in those cases that somebody walks away saying, my ex got everything, there are reasons that happened, right? Sometimes they're like very just reasons why those things happened. Oftentimes it's just because of a complete mismanagement of the case from beginning until end that result in these, you know, because people think all the time that legal decisions can just always be reviewed. And that's not true. You know, I was talking to a woman the other day, just like out in life, and she's like, oh, I got divorced, but now I'm doing a set aside. That's incredibly hard, especially if you have an agreement, right? To get the judge to come back in and go back over stuff. I had a woman call me who was a friend of mine, and she had signed away millions and millions of dollars, never consult while her father was dying. So like in a 3-week period, she signed an agreement, filed the paperwork with the court. The court was getting ready to sign the agreement. Okay, signing away millions of dollars while her father was dying, right? And I'm like, oh my God, you know, and luckily we were able, and her ex was amenable, that we were able to help her get in with a mediator to kind of mitigate these things before and tell the court, hold, we've got to, you know, take care of some things. And luckily the agreement that they had filed with the court was so poorly written that the judge was like, I don't even know how we would legally enforce this, right? So they were able to get a redo before it was all done. But most of the time that's not, it's just like people call people, and the attorneys at my old office would be like, yeah, there's nothing we can do for you. You know, and those are, or, you know, or you've got like, you know, yeah, we can spend $50,000 trying to get this redone, but you got like a 10% chance. Like, who's going to go for those odds? You know, spend 50 grand for a 10% chance at winning. And sometimes the attorney's like, I don't even think you got a 10% chance. Like, I don't even know, you know, and that's terrible. So I think that the earlier, you know, I've been trying to like really kind of push this idea of divorce planning, which is really funny. On my TikTok, I got a whole bunch of negative comments about it, like that I'm plotting against, you know, and it was really funny. They chose to think that I was only talking about women when I was really just talking about clients, which can be any gender. And so, you know, this idea that like the more planning you do, the planning isn't to screw over your ex, right? The planning is to take care of yourself. That's the wrong focus. Like the focus should be about, I need to know what I don't know, right? What don't I know? So who are the people that I need to talk to learn what I don't know? I need to talk to a financial person. I need to talk to a divorce lawyer, right? I need to find out what I don't know so I can make intelligent and smart decisions about my life, and then go forward from there. You know, I think that so much can be handled and avoided by planning, and that's for both sides. Usually though, there's one party that knows they want out long before the other person is clued in, right? And so, but you can be strategic about that. And the strategy isn't to screw over the other side. The strategy is so that you can come through this without your kids and your families and yourselves being completely destroyed in the process, right? The planning is about helping everybody get to this end post, right? The goal line without carnage, right? Like, especially with our kids, but even with ourselves, like we should be important enough. I can remember my ex-husband said to me, you're a divorce lawyer, you're going to screw me over. And I just looked at him and I'm like, how long have we known each other? And he's like, a long time. And I said, how many people in the time that we've known each other have I screwed over? He's like, nobody. And I said, so why would I start with the father of my kids? Why would I start with you? And he's like, well, you've never gotten divorced before. And I said, you're the father of my children. Like, everything that I do badly to you is going to come in on them at some point in time, like some way, maybe not directly, but it's there. That energy is there. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I won't do that. So the planning is about helping everybody come to the other side, because when you're operating from level playing fields, it goes so much smoother, right? But where you've got one person that's got all the knowledge and you got one person that doesn't know anything, how do you ever marry that up, right? So this person's never going to feel like they were fair, that they had a fair shot, right? They were unfared against, as my kids used to say. I've been unfared against. And then, then this person feels like, it was a cakewalk because they got everything that they wanted, but they've got this really bitter, angry, resentful person that's doing this lobbing grenades into their camp all the time. How is that good for anybody? Nobody. Nobody benefits.
No, I think understanding where you stand and educating yourself is fundamental, 100%. And I don't think it's being, evil or, plotting against somebody. I think it's actually essential. It's like anything you do, like to your point, when you're going to go, build a house from scratch, you're going to figure out what other people are doing. You might go to Pinterest. You might figure out what other people are choosing. I mean, it's the same thing in anything. You've got to educate yourself and talk to the right people beforehand. Anyway,
Well,
this has been
Sorry, and the divorce process is designed to, especially here in California, like it's a level playing field. The court wants wants everybody to have the same information, right? Because that builds trust and that builds agreements and that builds a workable solution to a difficult problem.
100%, 100%. But, again, to reiterate, this has been such a great conversation and you're a wealth of knowledge in so many aspects of the divorce also. Spectrum, the puzzle. But I would really say that, fundamentally, and not because we're all coaches, but because that's what I wish I had when I was going through my divorce process. I really did. That thinking partner, that person on my side, that person that could really help me, educate me, calm me down.
Absolutely.
Make me see the reality, the truth from the false narrative that I've created, because out of fear and anger and all those frustrations that you have. So all of that, and it's streamlining and taking out the noise. Noise that's everywhere, so amazing.
Divorce with dignity.
Yes, 100%.
It is a thing. It is a thing, and it is achievable. You can walk through this with grace and dignity. It requires 100%. You to take the high road sometimes when the other side doesn't, but there's always and that's what I tell people all the time, like there's always a remedy, right? Usually more than one, right? But if you don't know that, you feel like you're being, completely pigeonholed into this one aspect, and that's all you can do, right? But there are so many other professionals, financial planners, divorce attorneys, therapists, coaches, all of us can help them see that there's a plethora of options, right? There's not just one way, right? You can go through this a myriad of different ways. So, you can go through with a straitjacket, but that's really not a pleasant way to exist for any length of time.
Nope, not at all. Well, thank you, Erin.
Thank you for having me.
For this amazing conversation and your insight.
Love it. I love what you guys are doing. I think this is so needed. And so it's going to be so helpful for people to make this kind of, I don't know, this tangled mess of emotion and legal and kids and finances and family and all that stuff, and like help it have structure and purpose and meaning and a clear path, right? Like, I feel like that's our job, is to take all the rubble and be like, okay, that's a huge boulder, we're never moving it. Let's go around that one. And then, okay, oh, here's some little pebbles. We can rake those over to the side and give them a clear path on how do you move forward through this,
Right.
without completely losing your mind.
And just even knowing the next step. And
Yeah.
that's it. It's like, you
That's
don't
it,
need
yeah.
to know
Exactly.
the whole, right? It's just like,
Yes.
just one step at a time.
One step at a time. That's right. Absolutely. Thank you
Well,
guys so much for having
thank
me.
you.